about that one in a minute too. Okay, here's my proof for evolution. We have a fossil. I'd like to point out the obvious, Your Honor. If you find a fossil in the dirt, all you know is it died. You don't know that it had any kids, do you? You certainly don't know that it had different kids. And how come the fossils in the dirt can do something the animals today cannot do? Animals today can only produce the same kind. Why do you think the fossil in the dirt could do something that the animals today can't do? Why can it happen long ago and far away and it can't happen today? I mean, if ape-like ancestors produced humans, let's have them do it again. I'd like to see it this time. Only let's get an observer now. Apes are still having babies, you know. Make another one. Then they're going to say there's evidence from vestigial structures. This one says the appendix is vestigial. The word vestigial means you don't need it anymore. Well, that's just simply baloney. You do need your appendix, okay? The appendix is part of the immune system. And people that have their appendix taken out are much more susceptible to all sorts of diseases. There's all sorts of research on that in the last 10 years. There aren't any vestigial structures. This one says the whale used to walk around. Here's typical stuff the kids are exposed to. Look at the whale's vestigial pelvis. That's what it says in the textbook. The whale's pelvis is evidence of its evolution from land-dwelling animals. Four-legged land-dwelling animals. Well, just hold on a second. Those bones right there in the abdomen of the whale are anchor points that muscles attach to. And without those muscles and those bones, the whales cannot reproduce. That has nothing to do with walking on land. It has to do with getting more baby whales. And the author that wrote that is either ignorant of his whale anatomy and should not be writing about it, or he's a liar trying to push some kind of theory off on these kids. Is that your best evidence for evolution, a vestigial structure? This one says humans have a tailbone that is of no apparent use. Well, my wife broke hers 3.5 months ago, and she's in excruciating pain tonight, 3.5 months later. Trust me, you need your tailbone. I was in a debate in North Alabama with the president of the North Alabama Atheist Association. He got up in front of God and everybody and said, folks, we got proof for evolution. The human tailbone, you no longer need it. I said, Mr. Patterson, I taught biology and anatomy. I happen to know there are 9 little muscles that attach to the tailbone, without which you cannot perform some very valuable functions. I won't tell you what they all are, but trust me, you need those muscles. I said, however, Mr. Patterson, if you believe the tailbone is vestigial, I will pay to have yours removed. Bend over. Won't take you but a minute to figure out that's not vestigial. There aren't any vestigial structures. And if there were, that's the opposite of evolution. That's losing something, not gaining something. Then the evidence from DNA similarities. Similar DNA proves the same designer wrote the code, folks. If God didn't make everything out of the same amino acids, we could only eat each other. God made it so the brown cow can eat the green grass and give the white milk and churn it and get the yellow butter, and I eat it and get the blonde hair because it's all made from the same amino acids. That's why there's similarities, not because they all have a common ancestor. I mean, a freshman law student in a court of law could tear that one apart, folks. That's not proof for evolution. And listen carefully tonight, because there is no evidence for any changes above the species level. Now, if you want to believe there is, you're welcome to believe that, but that's not science. That's your religion. And I think if you're going to keep my religion out of the school, we ought to keep your religion out of the school also. Evolution has no business being in the school. Oh. 5. I have just begun. Dr. Paulson mentioned evidence from development. This is often called the embryology argument. This textbook tells the kids the similarity between early stages in development of many different animals helped convince Darwin that all forms of life shared common ancestors. I was surprised, I guess I shouldn't be, but it's brought up in every debate I've ever done, but they still don't seem to get the message. This was proven wrong in 1874. Those little folds of skin under the jaw of the human embryo are not gill slits. They develop into bones in the ear and glands in the throat. They never have anything to do with breathing. They are not gill slits. And it ought to be criminal to call them gill slits. And any textbook author that puts that, any teacher that teaches that to his kids in school, after he's exposed to the truth, he should be fined at least or expelled from teaching if he's going to deliberately lie to the kids. Ernst Haeckel, embryology professor at Jena in Germany, at the University of Jena, he read Darwin's book in 1860. He loved it. It converted his whole way of thinking. His lifestyle was changed. Ernst Haeckel taught embryology, the study of embryos. Ernst Haeckel made this drawing right here, similar to the one Dr. Paulson showed us a moment ago, about the embryos having gill slits and tails. Haeckel made up this entire thing in 1869. He was trying to help Charlie out because Charlie said we should find evidence for my theory. 10 years later, they had none, so Haeckel made some up. On top are Haeckel's drawings. Underneath are actual photographs of those creatures. Now, either Haeckel is a lousy artist or he is a liar trying to promote some kind of religious worldview. Having studied it quite a bit, I'm convinced he was just a liar, that's all. He was actually convicted of fraud by his own university. In 1874, they had a trial, and Haeckel was convicted of fraud. I mean, convicted their own professor. But Haeckel's drawings still appear in textbooks today. They appear tonight on the screen. I can't believe this. This concept of embryology, proven wrong a long time ago. Then they're going to say natural selection causes evolution. The fruit fly is often brought up as an example. They nuke these flies and microwave them and x-ray them and get them to have all sorts of mutated babies. They get flies with curled wings. They can't, fly around. Flies with no wings at all. What do you call that? A crawl? He can't fly. But you get all these mutated flies, and every fly they get's worse off than the original fly. And that's proof of how we get ahead. Folks, that's not evolution. It's still a fly. And it's a worse off fly. This one about the peppered moth was proven wrong several years ago. The guy had to glue dead moths to the trees in order to take the picture for your textbook, kids. The peppered moth experiment is baloney. It didn't happen. It didn't work. But it's still in the textbooks. Then the evidence from structure, called the homology argument. He mentioned this as one of his evidences for evolution, his lines of reasoning. Similar four-limb structures in the human, the cat, the whale, the horse, etc. It's true, there's a similar design in the forelimb. I don't argue with that. I agree. I taught biology for years. But similar structure proves a common designer. Doesn't prove a common ancestor. And if you were in a court of law and you brought this up as evidence for evolution, I'm telling you, a freshman law student would poke the holes in this one. Say, excuse me, Your Honor, this doesn't prove we had a common ancestor. Couldn't it prove the same guy designed everything? I could point out that the lug nuts on a Chevy will screw onto a Pontiac. It doesn't prove they both evolved from a Honda 21 million years ago. The same guys are designing them, folks. And I could probably point out that if you looked at the code of Microsoft Windows as opposed to Microsoft PowerPoint, you'd find billions of similarities. Probably spell check is exactly the same in both programs. Because they're coming from the same designers, that's why.
That's time.
I got more.
Thank you. Please, Dr. Paulson can begin.
So I have 10 minutes. Okay. Well, you can probably tell that Dr. Hovden's given his presentation hundreds of times, thousands of times. Is this still on? And this is the first time I've spoken publicly about evolution. But, so he's got some good jokes. But unfortunately in science, truth is not determined by who can tell the best jokes. So we have to look at evidence. Dr. Hovden has, to be quite frank, he's made a lot of false and misleading